So we're in timeline of pre-med years now. We've officially made that transition. And what I think is really important for everyone to think about when they're mapping out the pre-med years is that there is no one right schedule. And I'm going to say it again because this is the most common thing I hear. I hear students say, I don't want to be behind. It's too late. Or my pre-med advisor says it's too late. Or my uncle, who's in no way involved in the pre-med experience, says it's too late. I don't believe it's ever too late. We actually have a session about that at some point today. And so therefore, when I talk to you about the timeline of pre-med years, some people I think like to build forward. You know, they like to say, I'm a freshman and I have to go to med school right after senior year. Or they say, I'm a freshman and I'm going to take one gap year, but then that's it. I have to be in med school by the time I'm 23. I'm not interested in those kinds of mappings. I understand why they might be convenient for someone who's in undergraduate school to think about freshman, sophomore, junior year, but that's just not the norm anymore. The norm is that you go when you're ready. And that might mean 8 nice, neat semesters, or it might mean 10 semesters. It might mean a gap year or 2. It might mean not so much a gap year, but a deliberate choice to go get a bunch of clinical experience and save some money as an RN for a few years before you go on. There's no one right path. So when I talk about the timeline today, I'm going to ask you to think about when you want to start med school. So kind of have a target year in mind. And then we'll build backwards to figure out what your years are. So I won't be saying freshman, sophomore, junior. I will be saying 5 years out from med school, 4 years out from med school, 3 years out from med school. And again, I'm going to say this one more time. I'm saying from med school as opposed to from applying. Sometimes I think that's confusing, but the reason I'm pushing it that way deliberately is that I have interacted with students. Like if you here are listening, watching today, and you're very new to the pre-med process, you may not realize that you are applying to med school about 14 months before you start med school. So I always want to say from the start of med school to help people understand that like that whole last year, year and a half before med school is the applying process. So let me throw the screen share back up here. Okay. You guys are watching me figure out how to multitask. Okay. Hopefully we're getting a couple chuckles. I feel like sometimes students will say to me, like, I don't know what to do. It's so hard to find information. I don't think that there's a lack of information about the pre-med process. I think that there's too much information and it's hard to know what's good, right? So I often think of this poor little boy who's just like, let me see what's going on in this water hose. So I'm going to attempt to not do that today. You guys can ask more detailed questions, but I'm going to deliberately try to just give you big goalposts and markers to help you kind of think about the structure. And then you can always fill in more details later. Okay, so in a minute, I'm actually going to show you real live Mapped because Mapped has a built-in roadmap. But I wanted to start with a slide snapshot just to kind of have something static. So if you are a Mapped user, which I know some of the folks listening, watching today are, we actually have a built-in roadmap for you. So you can get a free trial of Mapped at mapped.com. It's 14 days, no credit card required, no obligation. You can enter the card, but if you're not sure you want to buy, don't enter the card because it auto charges at the end of 14 days. So like, if you really just want to check it out, just go for free, no credit card. And what we'll do is help you map out those years. So I'm going to use that instead of like boring PowerPoint slides. I'm actually going to use an active mapped profile to help us keep track. But just for anyone who is like multitasking and maybe they're listening more than watching, I wanted to sort of stop and give a static slide just so people could look and kind of see what a roadmap looks like. All right, let me switch over to Mapped. So let's do a quick poll here in the comments. How many of you are applying to med school in 2022? Just type in 2022 in the chat if that's your year that you're going to apply to med school. So you want to start med school in 2023. And if you are going to start med school in 2024 and apply in 2023, type in 2023. Just want to see some of those comments get a feel of what we've got. And then anyone doing a 2024 application or later. And, I guess I should have asked this before. Is anyone applying right now, 2021? Probably not if you're doing years. Okay. Is there anyone here who is in high school? If you're in high school, just type in high school or pre-college. Okay, so we've got a big mix. That's great. Okay, that helps me just kind of know how to structure things for today. All right. So let's start with, since we have at least a few people who are actually at least 5 years out from med school. So let's start with that. If I am 5 years out from med school, and so I'm maybe I'm not in college yet. Oh my gosh, Annabelle's graduating high school today. That's amazing. Congratulations, Annabelle. So if you're in high school like Annabelle or about to not be in high school and you're thinking about what is the pre-med process like, one of the questions I get a lot of the time is, well, what science courses should I start taking right now to pre-read? I mean, if you want, you can do that. But I usually say like none. Don't start pre-reading your science courses. College is going to be hard enough. Do it when you get there. If you're really, really keen to start getting a jump on your med school experience or your pre-med experience, there are two things I recommend when you are not yet in college. One is you can start working on your critical reading skills. And people don't always want to hear that, right? Like a lot of people think, but it's medicine. I like science. Yes, but to learn all that science, you're going to have amazing reading skills. To do well on the MCAT, you're going to have amazing reading skills. To read patient histories, you're going to have amazing reading skills. So I trust that my pre-med students will always remember to keep their science and math skills sharp. I am here to remind you that you need to keep your critical reading, your critical thinking, and your critical problem solving skills sharp as well. So if you are thinking, what am I going to do this summer? One thing you could do is start reading something that's nonfiction every day. It might be your local newspaper. Those actually have pretty low reading levels. New York Times writes at an 8th or 9th grade reading level. So you may want to go more upscale to something like, The Atlantic or the New Republic. Longreads.com is a good one. But just, work on those reading skills. It's really easy to overlook and it matters a lot. The other thing I would say you could do if you're considering your career in medicine and you're not sure is go get some experience interacting with patients. This was really hard to do during COVID, but now that lots of people are vaccinated and things are opening up, it's becoming a little simpler to get volunteer work again. And you might love chemistry and love biology and love physics, and then spend 100 hours, volunteering, as a patient mover at a hospital or working in a senior home. And you might discover that you're not actually that wild about helping sick people who aren't, your immediate family members. And if that's the case, sure better to find out now than later. So that's step one, I think, is, you don't have to start with clinical, but I always think like, if you're considering a career in medicine and you're not sure, why not start with clinical? Get yourself a little patient experience, which is what I mean by clinical, so that you can find out if you really are going to enjoy this. Okay. So now let's talk about if you are 4 years out from med school. And here I'm going to share my map now. Sorry, guys, trying to multitask tech isn't working so great for me. So if you're 4 years out from med school, that might mean you're a freshman in college. It might mean you're a career changer who's restarting school. At that point, the most important thing you can do is focus on learning. And by that, do I mean GPA? Well, yes, of course. GPA matters enormously for applying to med school. So you want to keep your grades up. But what I want to emphasize to you guys is that at 4 years out, you are both thinking about whether or not you're getting that A, but also about the fact that almost everything you're learning in your pre-medical requisite courses. So your year of biology, your year of gen chem, your year of orgo, your year of physics, your biochem, you're going to need those again on the MCAT. So if you have been a smart person with great memory who can review notes and then go into a test and ace it, I'm thrilled for you. That's not going to work anymore, right? You're going to have to learn new study skills. So part of what you need to be thinking about is, am I retaining this information so that I can use it again later? So when I say focus on academic success, I'm saying, are you getting the A? Are you learning? Are you making sure to get help if you're struggling? And this is really important because I think a lot of times if someone doesn't get a good grade, they sort of spend a lot of time beating themselves up and then maybe don't spend as much time thinking about what they could have done differently. So the shift from high school to college is pretty intense, right? And if you are used to getting A's and suddenly now you're struggling really hard to get, a B plus or a B, or maybe it's even a C or a D in a science course, you've got to stop and think, like, what's different about this? Is it because the classes are so big? Is it because the pace is so much faster? Is it because, in high school, I usually could learn something from the teacher and then go read the book. And now suddenly in college, I'm kind of expected to do the bulk of my learning just from reading from the book. And then the class is like just highlights. It could be any of those things. It could be all of them. But so then you have to ask yourself, what resources can I take advantage of, right? So is there math tutoring or chem lab tutoring? Is there a center at your school that helps you? Can you visit your advisor? Can you go to office hours? Academic success in college can be a real shock to the system. And sometimes it's not even the first semester. Often it is. So that's kind of why I'm talking about it now, at assuming, roughly 4 years out from med school. But sometimes it's not till you get to, OChem 1 or OChem 2 that you really hit that hard moment. I tell us a story about my sister with her permission. She wasn't pre-med, she was pre-pharmacy. And my parents were educators, so they fully understood, right? Like, they knew we were working hard. They knew we were doing our best. They knew we were humans who didn't automatically get an A every second, right? That we had to work for it. And she came home and told my stepdad, well, I got a D- in Orgo 2. And he went, you passed, you didn't fail. Right? Like, I mean, obviously joke, right? Because she needed better than a C- in Orgo. She had to retake. But like, it was a big bummer moment, and he took it in stride with her. And, we talked as a family about like, okay, this is so hard. And like, what are we going to do? When is she going to retake it? And what she finally ended up doing was retaking it in the summer when she didn't have any other classes, and she got a B+ in the retake. So, not great, but better. And that kind of thing, I think it has to be out in the open. It can't be shameful, right? You just have to say, I think I can do better. I don't know how, so I'm going to go get help, and really reflect. So that's academic success. While we're still talking about 4 years out, I want to go back to that idea of volunteering. And I'm going to try to zoom a little here. We'll see how this goes for us. So, in this example, I'm assuming someone's going to med school in 2023, just here in the roadmap demo for MAPT. But volunteering can mean a couple things. Some med schools specifically want to see that you are doing social service. So they want to see volunteering of any kind. It could be Habitat for Humanity, it could be soup kitchen, it could be volunteering at a hospital or a senior home. Volunteering does not have to be clinical. And you can see, if you're looking at the thing I'm sharing, that clinical is the next piece of conversation. But some schools specifically want to see volunteer experience, whether or not it's about patient interaction, because they just want to know that you care about the community and the world. So what a lot of people like to do is combine volunteering with clinical by getting patient interaction experience as a volunteer, so that you're kind of doing 2 for 1. And that is great if you can get it. It's been very challenging to get volunteer work in hospitals because of the pandemic. So I think things are starting to open up. That's going to be a little bit easier than it has been. But volunteering can be anything that interests you. And if you were here for the Living with Mental Health session that Logan and I just had before, one of the things we were talking about is that it can be really good for your wellness to identify as something outside of being pre-med. So, you know, if you have always loved swimming and you still just want to be a swim coach for, you know, the 8-year-olds, like that's so amazing, right? That's amazing work. It's so fun. It's a break from the norm. Like your volunteering doesn't have to be in a clinic. It can be, because maybe that's what you really want, but it doesn't have to be. Now, clinical experience is something else you have to get. And mind you, look at me, I'm still at 4 years out from med school in this example. I'm going to say it again, you got to get clinical experience. And I recommend that you start getting it when you are 3 to 4 years out from med school. Now, I know some of the people listening are already under that timeline, and maybe you don't have your clinical and you're not in trouble. But the reason I think it's good to start early is that clinical is supposed to be consistent. They don't want to see 100 hours one summer and then never again. Now, it's cool if you do 100 hours one summer and then you have a bunch of different clinical experiences. That's fine. But clinical, it shouldn't be a checkbox, right? You're telling med schools, hey, I want to interact with patients for the rest of my life. They want to see you interacting with some patients. So I would recommend, if you can swing it, if you are doing, you know, career changing or traditional school where you're kind of doing semester at a time work as opposed to class at a time work, then what I would recommend is that you start clinical your second semester of school, right? So you have one semester where you just say, I'm going to focus 100% on getting every A that I can get, committing things to long-term memory, not just cramming to get the A. And then once you feel like you have that under your belt, then go find some clinical experience. And I can't read them all, but I can see the chat blowing up. So I knew clinical would be a hot topic. Giovanni, if you're with us and you want to share a couple of questions or comments from the audience, I'm happy to stop here and answer some before I go on to the next section. All right. She might be multitasking. I can maybe find some myself. I think I'm scheduled technically to moderate myself. Here we go. Andrew asks, does volunteering at a vaccination site count as clinical experience? Probably. So here's where clinical can get tricky. It's not about the job title or the location, right? Some people think clinical means it has to be in a clinic. Incorrect. What it's about is what you're doing at the vaccination site. So if your job at the vaccination site is maybe you're doing a vaccination site in the summertime outdoor where it's really hot, right? I've seen some sites that are doing that, like in tents, essentially. If your job is to run from the warehouse where the water and supplies are to the tents outside to make sure that the workers have water and supplies, one, I mean, that's a hypothetical, right? But if that's your job, one, we super appreciate you and that's amazing. But two, in that hypothetical example, that's not clinical, right? If volunteering at a vaccination site, you're doing patient intakes and talking to them and checking their temperature and, you know, really doing sort of part of the same sort of experience that a health worker would do, then yeah, that's clinical. Okay, let's see. Katya says, I do in-depth research with patients about their experiences with diseases and treatments, but it's over the phone or online platforms. Will this qualify under any rubric for med school application? It might. I don't know whether or not it's clinical, Katya, because I don't know what kind of research you're doing. If what you're doing is essentially taking patient histories, then that sounds like clinical to me. But you know, if it's more about the actual research, then it might be a research activity. The thing about all med school activities is it is a little bit of a judgment call. There are accepted definitions, but then you guys as applicants have to make a choice that here's what I'm doing, and I'm going to make the case that it fits under this activity. When you can call it clinical is when you are interacting with patients in a way that is related to their health. So if you're only an administrator, like if you're at the hospital and you sit at the front desk with a computer and check them in, That's not so clinical, right? It's still really helpful. We're glad you do it. But clinical is when you're really interacting with them in a way that's related to their health. Okay. Does being a medical scribe count as clinical experience? You guys are going to get a theme here. Most of the time, yes, not always. If you are a virtual scribe and you're never in the room and you're just transcribing notes, then no. I mean, it's still great work. You're still going to learn a ton of medical terminology, get a lot of insight into a doctor's life. So I still think it's amazing. But some scribe work is not as clinical as other. So again, you kind of have to use your own critical thinking skills to decide, am I in the room? Am I there where it happens? So I'm actually getting some shadowing and clinical experience while doing this. Okay. Okay, so a few of you have asked for clinical examples, but I think those are a couple minutes old. I feel like by now I've probably answered it. I'm going to move on to shadowing, because the next thing that happens is a lot of people confuse shadowing with clinical observation. So I'll say this. Clinical is the most important activity that you're going to get of all of your activities, which is why I listed it first. Shadowing matters too, and I think shadowing is different than clinical, which is confusing to a lot of people. But when you are thinking about shadowing, which is sometimes called clinical observation, the difference is clinical is I myself am collaborating with patients. I'm working with patients about their healthcare. I might be doing, work where it's like hospice or something, or home visits by myself, or I might be collaborating with nurses and doctors and other healthcare professionals. Shadowing is I'm not working at all. I'm just a little mouse following the doctor from room to room. Staying quiet, maybe saying hello to the patient when they say this is a pre-med here, and then otherwise just putting on your listening ears. And then if you're lucky, when you're not with patients, asking the doctor some questions. The main reason you need both is being a doctor is much more than being just with patients. So when you're shadowing a doctor, you're trying to find someone who's going to let you be with them the whole day or for a whole morning or afternoon, ideally repeatedly, like a couple different instances, because you want to see the doctor interact with patients, assuming the patients are okay with you being there. But you also want to see the less glamorous parts of being a doctor. You want to see the doctor argue on the phone with insurance. You want to see the doctor write up notes. You want to see the doctor have all of the moments of the day that are both patient care and other stuff. And that's where shadowing is really beneficial. And again, I know anyone who's been alive in the last year has found shadowing really hard to get. With the pandemic coming to, I wouldn't say an end, especially if we're talking worldwide, but with the United States getting a lot of vaccinations under control, right? Shadowing opportunities are starting to open up. There are also a lot of e-shadowing opportunities. So I'm literally saying e-shadowing, which is the opportunity that Mapped and Med School HQ offers, right? So e-shadowing.com. But there's lots of virtual shadowing, right? There's the web shadowers, folks. There's virtual shadowing. I mean, you can just Google and you'll find a million. Is web-based online-only shadowing as good as in person? No, of course not. Is it better than nothing? 100%. So make sure you're getting some shadowing. Oh, here's an interesting one. Okay, Hanukkah says, I started shadowing my mentor, but she eventually taught me how to scribe, chart prep, and help her place orders. This is something I can place under shadow or scribe. To me, that still sounds like shadowing, unless like, because scribing isn't its own activity, right? Scribing either goes under shadowing or clinical, and that just sounds like you had a really, really awesome shadow experience. Okay, let's move on down this timeline. Okay, so we talked about clinical and shadowing. I'm pausing here to kind of say now you're about, in this example, about 2 years to 18 months out from applying to med school. So this example person is starting med school in 2023. So you're 2 years to 18 months from going to med school. So 12 to 6 months from applying. At this point, you should be starting to reflect, if you haven't already, on the activities that you've been doing and which ones are meaningful to you. Now in Mapped, we have a place where you can actually journal them. So long before you're writing activities essays, you can just be jotting notes about whatever you did, whether it's EMT work, CNA work, soup kitchen work, being in clubs, research. There's lots and lots of different activities. You'll notice that I'm not talking about all of them today. I promised you I was going to do big stuff only. The really big things are clinical and shadowing. I believe you guys are going to organically get yourself to the other stuff. But so make sure that you've been jotting down notes, because you will forget. So there'll be days that seem really special to you, and then they'll start to slip away. So make sure you're somewhere, whether it's in Mapped if you're a Mapped user, or spreadsheets work fine, Google Docs work fine. Doesn't have to be Mapped, but somewhere you are jotting down some notes on the things you're doing and what they mean to you, so that you can have those notes for later when you're writing your essay. Okay, so again, in this example, somebody's applying in May 2022 to start med school in 2023. And you'll see here that I put MCAT prep from October to March. Now, a lot of people, most people, I dare say, wait and do MCAT prep after the new year. That's not wrong. It's not what I recommend. I think that applying to med school is an open book test, right? The whole application process is a known experience where earlier activity generally generates better results. So I want everyone to at least consider taking the MCAT in January or March of the year that they apply. Because then if, the unthinkable happens, you have a bad day, the power goes out in the middle of the test center, whatever, you then have March or April, or worst case May, as a retake opportunity. It's not the end of the world if you're taking the MCAT for the first time in May, June, or July. It's not the end of the world if you took the MCAT in April and you have to retake in May, June, or July, but it's not great. So I'm not saying those things can't happen. People take the MCAT in the middle of the summer and get into med school every year. I'm just saying, if you who are listening to me now are a couple years out from the MCAT, why not plan it for the very best possible scenario? So MCAT prep, I think if you can, start in the fall. So now you're basically 2 years out from med school, so that you get it done that winter or spring. So that's my speech about the MCAT. I just want to do a time check. We started at 11:30. Okay, so we have 14 minutes remaining. Letters of recommendation. The main thing here that I want to communicate is, don't wait to ask the spring that you're applying. Start building those relationships early, so you can actually be asking, way back 2-3 years out, just by talking to your professors and saying, hey, I'm going to be applying and I'm going to need a letter of rec. Is it okay if I stay in touch with you? But then I would still say, when you get to the moment where it's time to really ask them to write that letter, you want to consider asking in the winter or spring, so that that they have time to write it. I mean, I've written many, many letters, and I find that 4 weeks notice for writing a letter is about right for me. Now, in reality, it probably only takes me a couple days to write the letter, but I need 4 weeks notice so that I can think about this person, think about the things that I think make them special, and then carve out that day or two to actually do the writing. So yeah, I mean, have I written letters in June before? Sure. 'Cause, I mean, that's, if you work with premeds, that's your life, right? Like, you accept that letters of recommendation are part of your life. But man, when someone asks me in March to have it ready for them in April, it just makes me so darn happy. Like, I just love to see people on their A game like that, Okay. School research. So I don't think you need to begin school research earlier than the year you apply. You certainly can. There's no harm. But, what you're looking for at this point is schools that match your mission and values. And this can be tricky because a lot of schools have really similar mission statements. So part of it, I think, is tricky because you have the fear, right? You're thinking to yourself, but I want to get in. I mean, I've had people say things to me like, I'll go anywhere that takes me. I'm like, I get that sentiment, but you do want to kind of flip that a little bit. You want to think, I want to go somewhere that's a fit. And so one example I'll use, University of California, Riverside Med School. That's a great med school. Their mission is Inland Empire, right? That's what they care about, is people who are in LA County or whatever the next county in is, I forget, but they're on the east side of that county, or they're further in. Their mission is healthcare there, right? So if you are thinking about California schools and thank you, June, San Bernardino County. Our next speaker is already here, and he just reminded me. San Bernardino, that's the other one. If you're thinking about going home to practice medicine in Missouri, why would you apply to UCR, right? It just doesn't make sense. So you can start reading through school mission statements on the web. Again, in MAPT, we have a med school database, so you can read them there, but nothing has to happen in MAPT. It's all aggregated for your convenience, but it's all on you can look at places like the MSAR, you can look at Choose DO, Explorer, you can just look on school websites. And the other thing you want to think about when you're thinking about school research is state schools versus out-of-state schools, and understand that public state schools are usually required by law to have a certain percentage of people in state, because that's the way the tax funding works. So when you're looking out of state, it's not that public isn't allowed, it's that you're probably going to have better chances with private schools out of state. Okay. I'm going to go through these next couple pretty quickly because we're getting tight on time here. Personal statement prep, I recommend that you start January of the year you apply. Again, I don't think sooner is necessary, but the personal statement is almost like birthing a child. It should be a few months experience if possible. Primary applications usually open in early May of the year you apply. And, it's been changing a little bit. ACOMAS currently is opening in early May, and it just opens. TMD SAS used to do that. Now it gives you a couple weeks. AMCAS mostly historically and currently gives you about a month to work on the app before submissions open. Your goal is to have things in great shape, to be pre-writing as much as you can even before the applications open, and then using that time for AMCAS to be working on it before you hit submit, because you want to submit early. Now, AMCAS opened yesterday. I know a couple people who are applying this month on this call, or maybe this summer on this call. You do not have to hit submit on the day AMCAS opens, but you definitely want to be in the first week if you can, or at least the first month. Again, do people get in if they apply in July or August or even September? Yeah, it happens every year, but you're going to have better chances passing this open book test if you go early. So you're aiming to apply in May or June. Secondary applications, same theme. You could, if you wanted, wait the 4 to 6 to 8 weeks until your application is verified and then start writing your secondaries. But secondaries are well known. They're on the web. Some web schools post them. Some med schools post them. Secondaryapps.com has a repository of them. You can be pre-writing your secondaries while your primary application is being verified. And let's do the math here. Let's say you're applying to 20 med schools. Let's say each med school has 4 secondary essays. That's 80 essays. And we just did an inside med admissions on secondaries earlier this week. And the consensus from every single dean and director there was that they want to see your secondaries back within about a week, or they're going to think you're not very interested. So how are you going to write 80 essays in a week? Well, you're not. You're going to be pre-writing them. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, interview prep. So now we're really in the thick of it, right? You've done your primaries, you've done your secondaries. There's a theme here you guys are going to see. I don't think you should wait until you get invited to an interview to do interview prep. Again, things are changing a little with the way virtual interviews are becoming more important. But there have been years where people got in-person interviews and only had a few days notice. So what I say is, act positively, act actively, and manifest this goodness. Prep for your interviews in July or August. The earliest you're possibly going to get an interview is usually August. You might not get one till February. But if you prep in July or August, then if you get an interview in October, November, January, February, then it's just a quick brush up because you already did the bulk of your work. So I just mentioned interviews can be as early as late summer, early fall, or as late winter, early spring. So that's just a wait and see game. Usually you're going to get an earlier interview if you applied earlier. And then admissions decisions conclude typically in March of the year that you're going to start med school. You typically get about a month. There's kind of a new system for this called traffic rules with AMCAS, so I definitely recommend you guys check that out. But then you've got a couple of weeks there where you might have chances to revisit, you might get financial aid offers. It's all happening really, really fast, and you're making your decision and then making a commitment to a med school. And then here's where I think a lot of people think, I got in, her timeline's over. No, a couple more things. I find that a lot of people have this idea that med school starts in the fall. It actually often starts 4th of July week, like is your white coat, or late July or early August. So I want, again, not to create panic, but just to help you think ahead. You make a decision in April, you're almost immediately going to turn on a dime and get ready to, make the move if you're moving across the state, to find new housing, to say goodbye to your friends and family. That stuff happens fast. So, I just want to kind of have you be thinking about it now, that if you were thinking to yourself, oh, I'm going to go to Europe for June, July, and August before I start med school in September, you better plan to do that a different year. It's not happening the year you go to med school. And then the really wonderful moment, white coat ceremony. So again, I just said, in the US, I'm aware of med schools that have their white coats as early as like July 5th or 6th or 7th. And I'm aware of a few med schools that actually have it as late as Labor Day. Usually it's late July, early August. But in my mind, the timeline takes us to that moment. So given that there's that variation, and you're not going to know in advance because it's going to depend on who accepts you and who you accept back, you want to be thinking about, what in my life do I want nailed down and organized in time for this, right? So, if it's any last travel you want to do, if it's getting that move made, if it's finding where, the Starbucks is closest to your new apartment. And yeah, I mean, that's the day that it's going to really feel like it's all coming together for you. So I wanted to include it on this timeline because it's what you're really striving for. And then, of course, a whole new round of work begins, but we won't talk about that today. So we've got about 3 minutes left here before we transition to our next session. I'll take another look at the comments and see if we have more questions. Looks like a lot of people are still asking questions about clinical. So let me see if I can find some that are new. Denise asks, I had some clinical experience in 2019 during my senior year of high school. And so my question is, will that still be acceptable for my med school applications in 2022? The rule of thumb is that you can include high school experience if you have continued to have that same experience throughout college. If you just did it for a little bit in high school and haven't done it since, I probably wouldn't include it. In general, activities on your applications are post-high school graduation. So sometimes I think for people who are, straight out of college, it's if you think like, I haven't had that much time to do stuff. Sometimes for career changers, it means, how do I pick just 15 out of the last 20 years? But yeah, generally you're not going to include high school unless you've continued to do it. Aylin asks, what are your thoughts on taking a gap year or two after college and then applying? It's totally normal. I wouldn't do it just to do it, but it is incredibly common. And in fact, in this room, our next session is going to be about the non-traditional experience. So I'm going to let June Kim, who'll be coming on air in about 2 minutes, get into more detail there. But yeah, I would do it for the sake of doing it. But I think it's becoming more and more common because the list of stuff you have to do to apply to med school is just getting so long. With the MCAT having 4 sections now, just taking all of the prereqs that you're meant to take before you take the MCAT can take 3.5 years. And then there are additional prereqs that you need for med school that you don't necessarily need for the MCAT. And then somewhere in there, you're supposed to be getting clinical experience. Now, again, I have said, and will continue to reiterate, I think clinical should be slow and steady from freshman year or 4 years out on. But I know that some people just feel like school is my job and I can't have a job and school. So they end up getting a lot of their clinical in their gap years. Just keep in mind that you don't want to apply and then go get your clinical thinking like, but I'll have it by the time I get there. Clinical is not about checklist. Clinical is about proving to yourself that you like interacting with patients, that you are committed to this career. So you want to have lots of meaningful experiences. You want to be able to say, I know I want to be a doctor because I have been interacting with patients, and even when it's hard and they don't thank me, I love it. I'm going to wrap up there. You guys have been a wonderful audience. Thank you for bearing with me with some of my tech hiccups earlier, and thank you for being so engaged. I know I didn't put a ton of questions up screen, but I was looking at them and trying to answer as many as I could. If you have more questions about clinical, we have lots of episodes on them on map.tv and premed.tv.